I'm going to just jump right into it. We're going to start, and I'm going to introduce that this talk actually came from the coalescence of a talk that I did with these two gentlemen. Can everybody already see my screen as well? I'd make that assumption, but let's just give me a thumbs up if we're good to see what I'm doing here. Okay, killer. Good, thanks, Wes. All right, so I did this kind of at the ask of Andrew Morgan. Eric Woodard had done something with Phyllis Lee the year before, kind of getting very strategic and staying at the strategic level about implementing CIS. The why should I implement CIS? You should implement CIS. Those types of things. Hi, Brian's Fireflies. And so that was what they focused on. And Andrew said, listen, I want y'all to get more tactical. I want you to get more into like the how do we go forward with this as an MSP? What are the tactics we should employ? What are the things that you failed at? What are the things you did well at? And so this last year we got, I hope, more tactical. Y'all let me know in the chat and be honest, right? Tell me if you think we need to answer questions or something's missing or challenge the thoughts I'm placing forward. I think that's the fun of this. I will be interrupted by the chat. I can pay attention to it. That means you could probably distract me as well. Please don't if you can avoid it, but I suppose game's on. Okay, so this talk was with Cameron Rose. If you don't know Cameron Rose, he is the actual person that implemented a lot of what Eric asked to be implemented in his MSP at ProTech. And Eric and I go way back. Eric and I first met at some advisory councils in the 2016-17 timeframe. And then ultimately, I didn't see him in 18 to 19. And the reason was Eric had been, to his exact point, hiding in his basement from his clients because they were all ransomed during the Kaseya event of 2018 and the webhook, I think, modality of which they had gained access. And Eric kind of had basically the worst of the worst happen. And Eric and I have now served in many capacitances, including running MSP 911 cases together, which is, if you don't know, MSP911.org is a charity that we run, myself, Jason Slagle, and Robert Chaffee, to help MSPs when they're going through their worst day. Anyways, short story, we gave this talk. Eric and Cameron and I built this together, and so I'm bringing it here to try to take some of the takeaways from that talk for this conversation. To the next point, I am Matt. Nice to meet you. So I'm Matt Lee. I was a practitioner in every seat almost. I was technician number 7 all the way up to project services, project management. I never did service manager. I did some service desk to some extent and helped work with that, but been in a lot of the roles in a growing MSP. We grew from just under $1 million to 3 and 5 and then merged to be somewhere in the 20s with 3 other peers, and then grew that and exited at 40 and at 620-ish million over the last couple of 5 years, 6 years now or so. And I've been working at Pax8, working in SME roles externally as well as advisory internally. And then they allow me to work on a lot of stuff like this. So that's me. Nice to meet you. Owen?
Yep. So I'm Owen. I'm currently Vice President of Support and Operations at CyberFOX. One of my big roles that I have at CyberFOX, which is probably why I'm here, is GRC. So I've been doing all of the governance and risk and compliance work for CyberFOX. Before that, I worked at the the ConnectWise software company and the ConnectWise MSP before the ConnectWise software company. So I had worked for them for about 7 years, and I started as a technician as well, and kind of worked my way right on up, all the way through
Nerd.
the ranks there. Yeah, total nerd. And eventually got put into operations and stayed in operations ever since. So I've been trying to figure out how to do stuff for 25 years.
Yeah, but operations is such a challenge. And if you think about it, especially with the all-in seat price type models for MSPs, the way an MSP can grow profitability is either through operational efficiency, right? The ability to be more efficacious or more efficient. And those kind of things play into operations extremely well, don't they? That's kind of the
Oh
goal.
no. No, you try to fit everything into that box,
Yeah,
right?
man. That's
So
it.
yeah.
That's it. I digress. Good. All right, cool. I want to start with this premise of what we think is wrong here, right? So everybody's seen this comic, I'm sure, in the audience, right? Like how standards proliferate. There's 14 standards. We get in an argument about something that sucks that we don't like, and now there's 15 standards or something that doesn't quite fit and those kind of challenges. And so it can be a bit overwhelming. And I think that my biggest advocation isn't necessarily that you adopt CIS. My biggest advocation is you adopt something that says that you're not the smartest guy or gal in the room anymore and that you are submitting to the will of the greater body of trying to solve this, in my opinion. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Owen? Like, Why should you choose
Yeah.
any type of framework at all?
I mean, if anything, it gives you a place to start, right? I mean, it's just like you can't be the smartest person and cover all bases all at once. So having that framework just makes it to where I just start ticking off one control at a time until
Yeah.
I get through the whole list. And then all of a sudden, wow, what do you know? I've set up a security program now under this
Yeah.
compliance framework. Makes it so
And
much
it
easier.
and it's defensible, right? And
Hmm.
when you think about that, which one's more defensible? Matt, why did you choose to put on anti-malware product X? Oh man, it's that new hotness. My boy Owen over there told me about this sweet deal, and I met their CISO, and they gave me this cool dinner prize, and like, or is it because I chose 10.1 says to have anti-malware on all enterprise assets, and the specific asset class that this tool solves is the one that I need to solve, and that 10.2 and 3 and 4 go on to say it needs to be centrally mod. Which one's more reasonable? And right, so when we think about it, the
Hmm.
takeaway here, and I want every one of these slides to have a tactical takeaway, something you as an MSP can write down and say, here's something that I can know or do. In this case, the tactical takeaway is using a framework becomes a defense, an active defense in Ohio and many other states of reasonability of saying like, hey, if I make during the time of my breach or compromise, if I am following a framework at that time, then I can be held to limited or no liability. Right, that first started, I think, in the Ohio bill in 2018, but there have been other safe harbor clauses around the country entering into law as becoming active defenses. So following a framework becomes an active process for defense. That's the takeaway on this slide. Anything to add, Owen, before I move on to the next one?
No, no, that's exactly it.
Okay. So when Eric was asked why Protect chose CIS, this is where he kind of came into it. Is number one, it's the only framework that has prioritized implementations of each safeguard, and really what he meant was of each control. Controls, there are 18 of them. Those controls are categories, like they're major categories of like 5.x is identity management. 1.x is asset or physical asset management. 2.x is going to be software management. 3, data. 4, configuration and extensibility there. Right. And so, anyways, the point being is that they're prioritized. They're in IGs, and I'm sorry for anybody that's way deeper than this, and I'm going through kind of the basics. I apologize. But there's implementation group 1, 2, and 3. If you look at 1, there's only 56 safeguards in that make up the controls that it manages. Those, if done, stop something like 76% of the TTPs or techniques and practices that are being used by threat actors. And if you think about that, that 76% is a little misleading in the sense that most of those TTPs are chained. You have 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. And if I'm moving 76% of those, that means that the chances that the next one I need is there is significantly lower than it would have been before, right? Because of that reduction. So the point is that was done by a study by CIS. Again, they're one of the only ones that does these kind of studies to go along with it. And it was saying, hey, if you implement these, we compared them to MITRE's TTP list, and we've said that these would have prevented those if done and executed properly. A lot of rounding off the edges there, so anybody wants to throw stones at me can. Number 2, it's born from blood. Every safeguard that's in CIS came from something that would have been destructive. And so that's, if you think about it, that's why that coverage of the TTPs exists in that corollary. 3, it's agreed upon by hundreds of IT security professionals. Again, it's saying, I'm not making this up. And Eric uses this slide
Hmm.
when he's explaining it to clients of saying, like, why did I choose this? Why are we going down this path? We're in an unregulated industry. We're not being forced to do this. Why are you taking me down this journey? 4, it's the only framework that addresses small and medium-sized organizations. Even though CIS uses the term enterprise, they really mean enterprise in the British version of that, of a to do something or an organization to accomplish something, not enterprises in the top 100 of companies in our world or space. 5, measure how adequate the controls are at stopping the top 5 attacks. That goes back to the community defense model of looking into those. And then 6, it's the only framework that's updated every X years. I won't say 1 to 2 because I don't know if I'd call 8.1 really a major update, and it's been quite a while, so I'll point fingers there. But every X years it gets updated and it stays more current with the relative body of information. Anything to add as to why? I mean, this was why Protect chose CIS. Any thoughts here, Owen? I have a couple.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the way CIS does it with the layered effect, right? Start it simple and you can make it more complicated.
Yep.
It makes it so much easier for someone to implement the CIS controls instead of going, let's say you're going to go to NIST 800.53 and you got hundreds of controls to get through before you become
Yeah.
compliant with that one. So
Yeah.
that's a really tough uh, compliance framework to try to get through. But
Yeah.
this
And
one makes it so much easier for a small and medium organization to get through.
yeah, I like to say that to NIST that CIS is the how to NIST's what. NIST might
Hmm.
say, "Have thou shalt have an identity management practice." CIS says, "Hey, bro, have a list, use unique passwords, keep that list somewhere, be able to centralize your identity provider." Like, right? This granting and revoking process, like they get very specific, but not so specific as to be completely living in the operational space, right? So that's why I
Right.
would say CIS. All right. Hopefully, we've convinced you that CIS is a good go-to. I don't want to spend all the time on it. And I'll also say, if you're in the audience and you can chat or you can ask questions, there's like 100 of you. Please feel free to say something and say, "Hey, Matt, I have a question," or "I think you're an idiot." Any of those are viable. Okay, cool. Next. So the other thing that Eric and team use this for is product selection, right? Like to say that it helps you put on your blinders. Oh, and I don't know if you've ever lived this life or even advocated this life, but has any one of your owners ever come back, handed you a shiny tool and said, "Hey, man, I bought this at a conference"? Anybody
Let
in
me
the audience
think.
experienced that?
I think every time they went to a conference, I think I ended up with those. And
Yeah, same.
yeah,
Yeah, same. Director of technology, here's your new technology. I hope it works, right? And I
yep.
don't mean this to be pejorative or even, hate the fact that capitalism encourages this, right? Okay, I'll stop for a question. Someone said, "How does CIS compare to the CMMC controls?" All right, let's start without getting massively nuanced in the sense that CMMC is very specific around CUI, FCI, SPD, or controlled unclassified information, federal contract information, and security protection data. And I might even be missing a classification in that standard. And CMMC has extremely covered guidance for those measured objectives that come from that in the guidance documents. So very different than CIS. If the spirit of the question was meant to be like the breadth of coverage and such, the CIS, when Sheldon Phillips did this kind of map out manually, he estimated that CIS covered like 40-ish, almost 50% of CMMC's overarching body of things they're asking you to do, notwithstanding of the nuance problem of where the data flows and things that just don't get talked about, some of the governance differences, some of the physical security stuff that's not in CIS. Like, does that hopefully helps answer your question, CIS versus CMMC? CMMC is very specific to the data flow around controlled unclassified information ultimately in contract information, whereas CIS is, in my opinion, a much more broad security focused and very iterative as you continue. It's much more of a roadmap for being secure than it is a roadmap for being compliant, in my opinion. So hopefully that answers it. Follow up with another question if it doesn't. But back to this point, Owen, of like I've had my owner, I was a part owner, but an owner come back from a conference and say, "We bought this tool and we're going to implement it." A great example is like when we got our RMM. Our RMM didn't do much in the beginning, man. Like we bought it, we put it on every agent, right? But like on every machine, but like what did it have to do to be something valuable, right? Owen, what did we have to do to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like for us, it was like it came back. Well, I've got 5,000 agents, so
Yeah.
yeah. So what do I do with this? And we deployed it on
Right.
every client. Just put it on
Yeah.
everybody's machine. We'll
Yeah.
eventually figure out what it can do and how we
Yeah.
can actually monetize this thing. So
Yeah. And we'll get back to that because we ultimately did.
yeah,
But I propose a different way of approaching product selection. You should start with the goal in mind. You should start with the why. You should start with what controls and safeguards you're trying to meet. I'm going to give you some tactical pieces to take away for this. But the one takeaway from this is you should do your product selection based on filling a gap, not based on the best deal you got from someone at a conference or even in a webinar like this one. All right. The next piece is like prioritization sucks. And I think sometimes we let perfect be the enemy of good. But I like to start with this quote of a problem well stated is a problem half solved. This comes from Cameron saying, like, when he had to take this on as operations inside the MSP that he worked for at ProTech, he's like, let's first start by just defining what the hell we're actually trying to accomplish. And that's not always the easiest things to do, but ultimately it is start with the most easy to get and easy wins. Get some things under your belt, close some gaps, take the ones that you can get, and come back and get the harder stuff. I don't know when your thoughts on this, Owen, from an operations perspective.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's that's pretty much how we approached it at CyberFOX. Where we're a cloud service provider, so we needed to become compliant. We're relatively new to this, and it was all right. Well, how do we start first? For everybody's talking about SOC 2. Let's get SOC
yeah,
2. It's
yeah,
relatively simple, right? Not as many controls as everything else, but then we move up to ISO, right? And now we're moving into FedRAMP.
right.
So yeah, it's all about just layering them in. Once you get one framework down, like if you got CIS down, like you said, 40% of your CMMC controls will be covered. But it's the
Yeah,
same
without the specificity, but yeah.
without being
Sorry.
specific, but
Yeah,
still, you're also any other compliance framework you have. Once you start doing one and you get a
yep,
control done, that helps you knock off, the
Yeah.
next
And there's
one.
only so many ways you can say have an asset inventory. You can ask for different pieces of it, but at some point
Hmm.
it all comes back to having an asset inventory, right? And if
Yep.
you ever want to get me going at a bar for like 6 hours, ask me what an asset is, and we can get into that for fun. But also in this case, a problem well stated, start with the low hanging fruit. Go with IG1. Go through the whole thing of IG1. When Phyllis Lee said they added the IGs into CIS, it was because major organizations, major enterprises, and you as well, MSPs out in the audience, would get stuck on hard things like the Control 3 around data and things where they just couldn't get past that point. And so instead they started shifting it into, all right, let's get the highest priority things done first and come back and do IG2 and IG3. So I like CIS because it allows you to prioritize the controls in that manner. All right. The other thing I think that a lot of people, when it comes to actually putting the security in for their clients, miss is trying to make it a bolt on or trying to add it as just a thing that I sell or a tool or list it by the tool. In my mind, there's so many pieces of this that have to be part of what you offer as a service. I'd love to see some thumbs up in the audience. You have to, I would imagine, make security just part of the business outcomes you are already promising and the things that we need to do. And yeah, so got some thumbs ups there. So the point is that I think that you should be putting these in. The client does not give a shit. We'll get to that in a bit about hearing about this controller, that safeguard. They just don't care. It's not their job to care. And so we have to make these baked in and make them part of your service management, service agreements. But that's easier said than done, right? Like I'd ask anybody to think about that. Okay, go put these controls in your services. How are you going to do that? You don't even know what service leads to serving the control. And I think that's a challenge. If I was to hand this to you, Owen, and say, okay, I need you to take all of your stuff and put it into that beautiful stack you sell to your customers and put it in the MSA, where do you begin down that path of starting that?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
vendors lie. Yeah, Dennis, you're
yeah,
right,
that's
baby.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's I mean, for us it was always about, you take one part of the technology and you just put that into your stack that you're going to make standardized for all your clients. Doesn't mean every client's going to use
Yeah.
it, but at least they are on the path towards being standardized and having that security tool in place,
Yeah.
whether they use it or not, is
Yeah.
another thing, right?
100%. I first met an Australian MSP that did this where they had a year and then a half status for each of their stacks, and they would call it 2025 H1, 2025 H2, 2026 H1, and they would basically tell their clients, we will be at our discretion once every 6 months changing the things, the tools, the systems we use, and you can never be more than three back. Right? Which gave him the
Hmm.
ability to sell into those client bases if there was a change, the ability to cut them over time and kind of triage it through an operations perspective. But no matter how you do it, I think you should have a way to change your stack and build in these tools as you go through and find this. And then sometimes you'll just be backfilling things you already should be doing, in my opinion. There are things we've been promising to our customers that we haven't really had a good framework for accomplishing, and this will be some of those things where this will come out. So the tactical takeaway here is you should put your controls tied to your MSP services, and we're going to try to give you some tools for doing that next. Okay, if you haven't seen this before, Eric actually and I go way back in the sense that he literally was part of my origin story. I first kind of chatted with Eric again after he was going through his major vulnerability, and he's explaining to me all these challenges and things. Hey, William Capes, what's up, buddy? And he was explaining to me all these challenges and things that he was experiencing, and that was a lot of the basis for my origin story, which I'll save for y'all for another time. But essentially, I sent an email out called My Single Greatest Fear that was very much tied to his experience a few months before that. And anyways, long story short, now fast forward 5 years or so, 6 years, and my team and I had built under the charity and a partnership with Pax8 a framework, maps is what it's called, frameworkmaps.org. But it's an intent to take the safeguards and take this word soup they hand you and break it into what does it mean. So in this slide, and there is an actual link later, you can use this to get to it from our CyberFOX from the charity. But we took and worked with CIS. We had Charity Otwell and Joshua Franklin and Phyllis Lee in some cases, John Strand and a few others pop in to kind of talk about the controls and the safeguards and ask what do they mean. One of the examples I'll give is, and I know you can't read this text, but down at the bottom, there's like all that gray. That gray was an MDM could help at this. Yeah, shit, a lot of things could help at this. Like, why didn't you list those others? And it wasn't meant to be exhaustive. You were just giving an example. And so we had to carve out those things that were exemplary, but not the control. with their permission, right? So this is vetted through their team. And distill it down into the one what, the green box, that asset inventory, and then the subcomponents, like, hey, what is an asset? Anything that has the ability to store or process data. That's what it says in there. Well, we drew that out to try to make it more visual. The oranges and octagons, their shape and color for color or for visual challenges. The orange and octagons are proof words. They're things that I can say you did or didn't do, and we'll get into that a little more lately or later. And then the top right octopus kind of thing is all of the interdependencies. If I suck at 1.1, I'm not going to do 10.1 well. Because if I suck at 1.1 and I don't know that my mobile phones store or process data, then I'm probably going to be like a lot of us in the audience, and I'm not going to have an anti-malware product on my phone. I'm not going to have DNS protection on my phone. Even those are all enterprise assets. They're all things that have been decided as enterprise assets because they can store or process data. Now, if anybody wants to get on an argument with me on that, we can definitely have that conversation. Balloon vendor, yeah, Justin. I'll get into that later. I had to do a balloons chart. Justin might be referencing, but when I was trying to explain the visualizations to, maybe Justin doesn't know, but when I was trying to explain the visualizations to the CIS staff, the staff used it internally with their executives because I was trying to explain to my data assistant, Veronica, who's not technical, controls, and I found myself often having to explain the technical in order for her to understand the control we were trying to do. So I just did the first 3 controls or safeguards on balloons. Like number 1, Owen, have a list of your balloons, including color, what they're filled with, fill date, origin, right? And then 2, that you should mark anything malicious that maybe lives in a drain or is red or filled with hydrogen, right? And then the 3rd was like, get rid of unallowed balloons. Like we don't want the balloon in the drain. We don't want anyways, obviously I was making an it reference, but I digress. The point is this was made in a way to make this easier. You can use this. And what Eric advocates doing is literally just going and checking off the components and saying, are we storing MAC address? Maybe we can't in this particular iteration. We'll come back to it. Maybe we can't do this particular piece. We'll come back to it. And even in the MDM's case, you'll see where Eric wrote that in to say if MDM isn't in place and we aren't selling you MDM, then we're not going to do this component. Sometimes doing safeguards is just as valuable to find what you're not doing, right? And operations, even think about that. Owen, anything to add of like, sometimes it's better to define what you don't do, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just don't have the tools to manage every single device that you have, your customer has, mobile phones, they change those out on a frequent basis.
Yeah.
I mean,
and they always tell you, but that's my point is you can start defining those edges, right?
yeah.
Looking at the balloon diagram here, use unique passwords, right? For all enterprise assets. Best practice includes at the minimum. And so what are these? Those turn into orange words. They're things I can measure, saying at a minimum, you need 8 characters for those with MFA and 14 characters for those without. And this is also an example in our 14 frameworks, and now let's make it 15th. This is an example where I think this is too weak now. I actually believe that when this was written to now, the difference in speed of cracking a password or having rainbow tables that would already represent some of those at 8 characters, even with MFA, it may not be enough, especially depending on the type of MFA. But again, as a practitioner, you can further define from here. But this is the password policy talking about, and even in Phyllis Lee's case, when they were defining this, shared responsibility matrix. You're about to see it, friend. Justin. Yeah. You and I are besties right now. I know I'm nerding out here, but yeah, Justin said shared responsibility matrix, which I did a talk at RSAC last year about SRMs with Lawrence Cruciana. Big fan of that, and you're going to see it appear here in a second. Okay, this is the one I wanted to spend a lot of time on today. This is a document that we kind of ideated on. Eric Woodard said this is his 4th, I think, iteration of working through the controls and implementing the controls with his clients. And so this is kind of that culmination of that. And I want you to take this away. This is that tactical takeaway of for each safeguard that you're going to do, whether that be the 56 IG1s, whether that be 12 of them, whatever it is you're tackling first, you should make out a sheet like this. I'm not saying these answers are perfect. They'll be different for your own organization. But let's dig into what we have here. Justin, I'm going to save the beautifulness of the shared responsibility to the very bottom. But I just want you to know you're in my soul right now and stop reading my diary. Okay, the first part is title, CIS control, and description. So it's like, here's the title. It's CIS 5.2, use unique passwords, right? CIS control 5 is the actual macro control family. And for those that don't know, control is a macro category, whereas a safeguard is a subcomponent that helps make up the understanding of how I'd solve that control, that category, if that makes sense, right? So in the case, the category is account management. identities, the I and A of IAAA, identity and authentication to some extent. Use unique passwords for enterprise assets. Best practice, right? The one we just looked at a few seconds ago. So we put all that in there. Next is I want you to sit down with your team, or if it's a sole, entrepreneur, to think through and maybe even ideate with your MVP Claude, like what is the benefit of this safeguard to my client? And I took a poke at this to say, if I get you to use unique passwords that are easy to access, and our strategy, and maybe this takes back to a point of, in some cases, you have to come up with a strategy to meet that control. And that strategy will require a tool. Now, I know it's a lot on the nose that I'm talking about password management. I'm not stupid. There's a company here that does password management, but that's not the intent of this. The point being is that if you're going to go down and try to manage unique passwords across the board, you're going to have to make it easy for people not just to do Snowflake 12 and Snowflake 12-Google, Snowflake 13-Microsoft. Like, while those are unique, they are appendedly unique and are just a construct for people to keep passwords. We've never seen that, right, Owen? Nobody ever.
Oh, no, no, no.
Nobody on this call, me personally, nobody's ever done stuff like that. Funny story, when I was asking my family to implement a password manager, my wife had rolled in and she's like, okay, I got everything in the password manager. I'm like, cool. I go to use one of her passwords with her one day, and it was the same password I had known that we had used for a long time. And I was like, babe, this is the same password. Like, we've used this. This needs to be rotated. She's like, oh, well, all of them are that password. I'm like, oh my God, I have failed you. I have not taught you the appropriate things you needed to know to be successful. Anyways, but the point is that the Kat had suffered from me not giving her good instructions. So there's part of this where in order to do this strategy, we need to come up with all the components we need. So the benefit of the MSP client that comes from that strategy of using a password manager, setting passwords to be, trying to do it with your 80-year-old mom, right, Brian? Dude, and I hope you feel better, man. God bless, I saw that. That's ugly, dude. So glad you're hopefully feeling a little better a couple of days later, or at least drugged well. If that was you that I thought I saw fell. Okay, benefit MSP client. Decreases the impact of a compromised password to spread to other systems. Like if I have at least some idiot get my password compromised or something be completely pwned, then it doesn't spread to other services, right? The spraying of that as a credential stuffing mechanism doesn't work. So the benefit of the client is like stuff doesn't just get compromised as often, and it's easy to sign into stuff. You could just click and there's the password and you sign in, right? And that means for them to be way faster and improves their experience and their efficiency and increasing their security. So if done well, the benefit to a client is they're faster and easier to get in with more security as a result. That's a win-win, right, in my opinion. The next one is benefit to the MSP. For each safeguard that you're going to look at, what is the benefit to me? Why do I give a shit? And the reason I have to say it this way, can I cuss on the CyberFOX webinar? I'll take that back, man. That's on me, bro. I don't know. Okay.
I'm okay.
Oh, cool. Good. So the point is like the benefit to me, if you don't get that dealt with, people won't do it. Right? Like if I don't give my people a compelling value or reason to do the things they're doing, people won't do it. That's human nature. You have to get them bought in. You have hearts and minds to win. And so the benefit of the MSP here, I'm trying to say, well, hey, users are more reliably able to log in. And then combined with SSO as the second part of that strategy, like it's really simple for them to log in, which means we're going to have reduced compromised accounts to deal with from an incident perspective, from the ineffectiveness of credentials. We're going to have less calls about people not being able to get into systems, and hopefully less calls about password resets. If we get using, and if anybody's used a password manager in their life and you get it really inundated in your life, it's pretty easy. Like it 99.9, right? Then now I can just use my password on my phone. I can use the same password on my laptop, all the things. All right. So it should be easier and less calls, which means we'll have less headaches and less frustrated customers. If anybody in the audience can think of another benefit to the MSP client, I would love your help. Or a benefit to the MSP, I'd love your help. So if anybody wants to win the Matt Lee points, they're not transferable. They're not worth anything. You can't exercise them, but I will give them out. So it'd be cool if you guys have any ideas here for the sheet. And that's the idea. Work with your team. Ask them for the things that you think it plays into as we're filling this out. The next ones get a little more complicated. This is where, going back to that, tie it to your services piece that I talked about comes into play, right? Like, what do I include? In this case, I'm going to, and did for a long time, we paid for a password manager and forced them to buy it, right? Oh, we're going to get into offboarding employees is less of a risk. Yeah, no, agreed. Okay, thank you for finishing my statement, Matthew. I would agree with you, right? Because now I have a path and we're going to get into that. So yes, I award you points. Configure, so my included services provide training around using unique passwords. Will the slide deck be emailed or made available? I'm good with y'all having my slide deck, Brian. I usually just give a Canva link. So I'll make sure and get that out. Y'all are welcome to have it. And then the Excel sheets only exist in that, so you'll have to kind of recreate the columns and headers. Okay. Cool. Yeah, great question. All right. So included services provide training. If I don't train people how to use unique passwords, even if I set up all the systems, I'll fail. I'll miss one. I'll miss some control. We have to teach the humans. So that's part of what we're going to provide as an MSP. We're also going to provide configuring all enterprise IDP systems to require 8-character passwords or greater when MFA and 14, right? So if I have a Microsoft Entra or a Active Directory aspect, I'm going to go set those things to be set that way. Let me pause. William Capes popped in with one and said, the benefit of the MSP is the client is using the password manager that makes your life easier and more secure. Amen. As a daily, my MSP gave this to me. Yes. One issue we all often have is demonstrating the value to the client on a regular basis where they live in the day-to-day. And especially to your point, William, where they feel the pain. Like when they're like, you can call up a story where I fumbled for a password in the middle of an important meeting and looked stupid and I failed. And I don't want that to happen. I want to look smart. I don't want to fail. I want to be successful. I want to do my job. So yeah, I love it, William. Good point. Matt points. I think I can trade those Matt points in though for mugs and such, from what I understand. So never mind, William. Thank you, buddy. William always making something cool for people. Okay, so appreciate you, bro. All right, so included, and then also configure all consuming SPs, right? So now service provider in the IDP SP relationship for those nerds out there, right? Make sure that those service providers that I can't bring into my SSO field for one reason or another are still set to those requirements, that when my users sign in with my top level domain name that'll give them access to things that matter, that they're tied to an 8 or a 14 character password depending on MFA. And where possible, MFA is not known to exist, I'm still going to enforce it. So you're now telling yourself in your MSA what I'm responsible for. You're building a list of the stuff that I'm going to do, at least to yourself, of how you get this done. That's what the included services becomes. And then configure password vault to be by default and to not allow repeating of passwords stored in the password manager, right? Like set it up so that they succeed. When I like to think about this, I try to make it easier for users to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong. Right? Just because I train them, why don't I make it so that when they first sign into their browser, it's automatically set to use that password manager, and then I'm not having to manage it. And then I am trying to manage which one they're using and the settings they're around. So think about those when you get into your operations of like the things you're going to have to do to make the user experience, to William's point, the best, if that makes sense. But just as important are inclusions would be exclusions. And I know I haven't been exhaustive in this list. It's more illustrative. But the point of this is that the excluded services, I'm not going to pay for third-party tools unless you pay for them, if the case that you're not putting it in your stack, right? And saying that you have to have this. Same thing if you're thinking about like licensing for patching. If you don't pay for your Cisco SmartNet, I can't patch the Cisco switch just because I have one from my buddy down the street. Like it doesn't work that way. Right. And so you have to make sure that you're setting those parameters for what you need them to do to be successful from an excluded services to say, this is something we're not doing. Legal compliance advisory in this case, like maybe we're saying we're not giving advice that this is going to pass some compliance that you need to meet. We're simply providing the tool. Right. To Owen, to your point in the very beginning of we're going to get the tool in their hands. We're going to do those things.
Yep.
I can't enforce HR policies, homie. Like I can't make your team care when I ask you as an MSP to do something. I can't. You're going to have to do that. So we have to set exclusions of saying, I can't deal with end user enforcement and discipline for policy violations. That's not my job. Last time I scolded an employee of yours, it didn't go well, right? So we don't want to do those things. So we're setting these, what are we not doing? And then also sometimes device classes can be a challenge. And what I mean by that is in CIS 10.1 doesn't specifically say a cell phone to you, but it does say enterprise assets, and enterprise assets are defined in 1.1 as something that can store or process data. And thereby they should be a class I'm going to cover when it comes to anti-malware prevention for enterprise assets. That's why in 8.1 CIS came back and defined the sub-asset classes, was for that very purpose, to show that this was a sub of that. If I say enterprise assets, I mean all of these things. And so when you think about that, you might want to define you're not doing it. Like in this case, Eric's line 1-for-1 was mobile devices are only in scope for password management tool deployment if MSP client has opted for MDM MAM management tool, optional MSP service. Note, mobile devices are difficult to manage without MDM MAM. So you're getting into like they're saying, hey, in their case, they sold MAM or MDM as a separate service potentially. You may not in your case. That may be part of your own operations. And that's why we try to stay tactical. Like you're going to make your own operational decisions based on your parameters, the things you have, the decisions you've made. We're trying to give you tactics that can be employed with whatever operations you decide to put behind it, some degree of dependency. Okay, I'll pause. Any questions before I continue down this chart? Does anybody have any questions? Owen, do you have any thoughts or things to add? We're kind of at the exclusions portion of this chart for now.
No, no, not really on the exclusion side. No. Um,
Anybody in the audience have questions or thoughts about using kind of a sheet to build out what your needs are for you to move forward with implementing this safeguard? Does this make sense so far? And I'll move on while that comes in or not. Okay. The next piece of this comes from the control itself. Got a couple thumbs up. Thank you. Several. Good. So frequency, this control, do you do any of this portion of level exercise as a collaborative exercise with clients? That's a great question, Mark. If your question is like, do I personally, or do you mean do you as a executive, like putting yourself in that editorial version of you? Either. Cool. Me personally, I have had these type of consultations with MSPs, specifically in guise of the trust mark is where I traditionally apply this. The trust mark from GTIA is made up of 136 or so of these 150 something controls, 153 controls. So, or safeguards, sorry, words matter. Anyways, yeah. So, collaborative exercise there with people. But then also, to Sean's point, we have a great spreadsheet from Pax8 that has CIS controls, what tools cover. This gets into an interesting side tangent, but Pax8's sales engineers and the security side, a long time ago, back when we had to walk uphill both ways into the snow, was made a sheet to say, well, Sentinel-1 kind of covers 10. But it doesn't get as specific as the data that we're creating through the partnership with Pax8 and Framework Maps, and even partners like CyberFOX trying to assess their tools and say what they actually do. In that specificity, you might look at a Sentinel-1 or an EDR and say, oh, it actually does 10.1, 2, and 3, and 4, and then it serves the ability to do 8.9 for log centralization, and then 13.1 for surfacing security-related events and alerts by that correlation of log centralization. I mean, it doesn't get into that detail per safeguard. It gets into just the macros control level, and so we're trying to bring that into a lot of places from a data set. I won't go too far off on this because I've got to stay back on my task. But yeah, that spreadsheet's a pretty good exercise there. And then, Mark, would you do any of these? There's a balance, and we're going to get to it. Clients don't care. And really, there's a part where you have to talk about up to the point made by, I think it was earlier, Justin, around shared responsibility. There are some things you're going to have to cover with them and ways we're going to say you should cover it. So let's move forward. Okay. So does not seem to have information. I know, brother. I'm sorry, Jeff. It's coming. It's frameworkmaps.org, but it's going to be Discord. Right now, it exists directly in Pax8's platform. It's a Pax8 and CyberRise CC BY, Creative Commons BY license. But right now, it only exists there. So short story, get with me afterwards. I'll be glad to fill you in on that. Okay, so then we get into frequency. And the frequency is sometimes defined, sometimes not. Like in this control, in this safeguard, it doesn't say review this annually or blah, 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 blah. So, Owen, what do you do as an organization when you don't have a frequency defined for a safeguard in your mind?
yeah, so I mean, you kind of have to make that decision of, you should at least in what I feel is once a year, let's review the control. Let's review to make sure everybody is still in place. But then you have to look at the severity of these safeguards, right? And say, this one's a really important safeguard, so let's review it quarterly
Yeah,
instead,
yeah,
or monthly, right?
yep,
And so sometimes, even though this particular safeguard doesn't call for a cadence for you to review, it probably should be something where at least every year you're reviewing the policies and making sure that the systems are all still set up to enforce that 14 character password
yeah.
or 8 character password or the MFAs.
I
Yeah.
want to address some questions. Daryl, you said with respect to legal compliance advisory, if we deploy a solution, how do we walk the line saying a product doesn't meet compliance? I love the question, shows nuance, and you understand the problem of this kind of hypocrisy. So what I'm saying is like, let's say you deploy a tool that meets let's say there's this fictitious control that says you must have a password manager just to make it super simple and on the nose. And let's say that control exists in CIS, but it also exists in CMMC. CMMC might have additional components that require FedRAMP moderate, or SPD requires it to now meet this kind of constraint. And so just because I've solved it here doesn't mean that it'll solve it over there. That's the way I might say that better, if that help explain that. Other examples where this might fall apart is, for example, let's say you have somebody with HIPAA and they might need to maintain these records for 7 years, but you're not selling 7 years of storage of anti-malware existence. And at some point, 5 years after an incident, someone sues them under the False Claims Act, and now they don't have that you need to make explanations of what you will and won't do to the extent of your knowledge. And you need to kind of set expectations. I don't know every framework. I'm not coming in as a compliance consultant to validate that T's are crossed and I's are dotted and I can gather evidence on all this. I'm simply solving security controls that keep you from dying. And so when I think about this, I don't speak of it like compliance. I speak of it as a strategy and a tactics to be secure. I hope that helps give maybe some clarity on that, Daryl. William said it's super important to always note that just because you have a tool, that doesn't mean it's a safeguard. Yep. God bless your heart, friend. Because that's the point. You could put Sentinel-1 on or any other EDR. I'm not being partial to Sentinel-1. Any EDR on and put it in monitor-only mode, and it's not meeting the safeguard, friend. It's not. And so that also gets into the same point of many times I have during our MSP 911 days, MSPs call in. They're not getting covered by insurance for the clients, the end clients, because that's not insured in their case. And they want to know what happened to this end client, and they're having to deal with it. And yet they didn't have MDR, so they have nobody to turn to. And they go back clamoring, saying, somebody answer this for me. You didn't buy that. When you bought the tool, you said you knew how to use it. 10.1 doesn't tell you to know how to use it. They assume that. And so when you get into it, we make a lot of times where we are providing something, but not really providing all the backing to make it efficacious. Anyways, off on a side tangent, which I can do every now and again. All right, cool. So yeah, Dennis then popped in and said, if you're not already using CIS as a way to assess, you should be for a lot of reasons. I think it gets movement. We'll get into that here in a minute. Okay. Staying on time. I apologize, y'all. I want to make the most of this and get each of these slides that should have some value for you. All right. Prerequisites tell you what I should have to be successful, like client governance and willingness to enforce the use of a password manager is all I could come up with here. I'm sure there's other things, password policies. Tools required. I need a tool, password management tool in this case to set it up. I also need the ability to do configurations of things, that kind of stuff. I'm dealing with this right now. How do I protect myself from HIPAA compliance? I have dental office and I can't again answer what I do and don't need. I'll come back to that, Michael, if I have time, because I actually have some thoughts on this conversation. Because it's a lot about saying what you don't do in this case. I think a lot of it's about what you, like, I am not keeping these for 7 years, but I can sell you a service. A lot of it's putting it back on the practitioners to meet their requirements to some extent in my mind. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Owen, but.
Yeah, that's really what you have to do. You have to be able to create that line and saying, this is what I am doing. This is what I'm not doing for you.
Yeah, I can't own your governance. I can't own your give a shit as a company. I can't. I can only own the tactical elements. I can own operational outcomes. Okay, so prerequisites, tools required, MSP deliverable to client. This sets what you're going to deliver. And if you look at this, when you're outputting this control and setting these things up in your own ticket systems, whether you're putting it in the PSA or setting timers or whatever it may be that you're doing, making projects for it, here's what I'm going to deliver in my quarterly VCIO or in my monthly or in my whatever it is. In this case, it's going to be implementation, monitoring and work alerts and configuration and change control. I'm going to be responsible for the deliverable, is the usage report upon request. You can define some things as upon request. Like, I'm not going to give it to them every time because they don't want it, but if we ever need it, I need to know that I have this available. That also might go a little bit to Michael's point of like defining how long you're going to keep reports, how long you're going to provide these things, what you do with them. Do you just send it to them and tell them they need to keep it? There's things that come into that to some extent. And then proof upon request of configuration. Like if you need it for evidence gathering, oh, and you live a lot in the compliance and you have to go to somebody and say, I need proof that this happened, right?
Yeah.
So MSPs, even if you're not in compliance, you're in compliance in the sense that if they ever try to go through compliance, they're going to be asking for these things and you need to be able to deliver them if you say you're promising them. And that's why I put this deliverable to client. You need to think through what is the deliverable I'm promising and be very intentional in that as you build your tool set towards CIS. Okay, and then MSP responsibility. This is what gets into the SRM. I love using this example. If my job is to patch all of your machines as an MSP, and I'm just purely judged on whether or not they're patched, I have failed. Because you know Sally or Bill or that one jackass that was the sales guy is going to leave his computer off, not patch, and then yell about it to management every time it patches right in the middle of an important meeting, even though he could have done it in the 14 hours he was watching YouTube yesterday, right? And so you have this challenge where at some point, if clients don't leave the machines on and allow us to patch, we can't be successful. That needs to be on their side of the responsibility, on the client responsibility segment. On my side, on the MSP responsibility, I'm going to maintain systems. I'm going to chase down patches. I'm going to have the operational and tactical capacitance to chase down and tell you when your stuff isn't patched. I'll manage that. The shared responsibility in that patching is that you're going to help me work with those customer partners that won't do the things, find the assets, keep the asset inventory up to date, those things that come into that management of that. And then the purely client responsibility might be paying for patches. Again, if you don't have the service and subscription for me to update your stuff, I can't update your stuff. If you don't buy that new server OS and do that project after end of life, I can't do it for you. Your responsibility is to do those things. This goes back all the way to the question about shared responsibility. If I at least define these things, then it's very clear contractually. It's very clear from a reasonability perspective, and it's very clear to the average human who failed, right? And when we get into this of where we need to draw the lines of where the success and failure is dependent, and I will jump forward a little bit, and just for time here in a minute, I think we're good for another 14 or so minutes. But you'll use these later in a strategy that Eric has used. All right. How do I operationalize this? I like to say drink your own champagne. Eric likes to say eat your own dog food, but the concept's the same. You never have more buy-in than your own company, hopefully. And you have more control over the outcomes. And also, if you can't do things for yourself, how do you purport to do them for your clients? Again, we're at case 50. Well, this last case was technically not a case, but we're at case 51 now of real cases across MSP 911, for MSPs going through their worst day. I've only just now in case 51 found an MSP that had an incident response plan and was following it. I don't need you to raise your hands, but I'd ask you to introspect. How many of you have an incident response plan for yourself when you go through an incident that you are following, that you have followed, that you found flaws in, that you've fixed? How many of you have dealt with those for your clients and have improved and created an incident response plan? Good, Sean, you should work on one. And it's usually most people don't have it. And I get it, right? Even big organizations don't that should. I digress.
It's not just having the plan, you got to test it too.
Yeah, test it,
Yeah.
tactically and kind of in a fake way too, and mock
Yep.
up operations and tabletops, but
Yeah.
also like really test it sometimes, and then afterwards go, what sucked?
Yep.
Okay, so the point is, start with you, start on you, dedicate time, give people the ability to succeed, tie their KPIs to it. If you don't put in investment in this or in doing it, it won't succeed. Right? Investment momentum is the ability to have time for people to focus on this, and then the KPIs to track and have them actually doing it. We even used our IR plan when building next door to us. That's cool. No,
Wow.
great, Wes. You're getting into like the reality of sometimes incidents aren't cyber incidents, and sometimes incidents could be harm cyber incidents that aren't cyber incidents. Their bots went wild and killed thousands of emails, like stuff that are incidents, but different kinds of incidents by that. Yeah, great. They're leadership plans, not technical plans. I agree. There will
Yeah.
be some technical implements, but those usually should come from the people that should lead that, in my opinion. Anyways, didn't want to get off on a tangent, but I love that we're talking about ours right now. Makes me very happy. Okay, cool. So the other piece is remember back to that RMM day one. I don't know how many of you were in the business when RMMs really became a thing and we started deploying them. And I do mean that in earnest or bell curve earnest, not the early days, but even then. But the point is, like, when we first deployed it, it was useless. Like, I didn't have value as a proposition out of it initially. It took long times for us to get there, and we'd build up this automation, and then it did this thing, and we'd build up this patching, and it did this thing, and we'd build up this access, and it did this thing, and we'd build this script, and it did this thing. But as we kept doing that and refining the automation and making it better, and many of you in the audience as well, you build a flywheel. You get to a certain point where it is continuing to go because it's already going. You're getting KPI savings of human hours. You're getting your reactive hours per endpoint per month down. You're doing things that track for you to get more efficient with the same dollars you have and the people you have. RMM became a thing, but boy, God, it was daunting in the beginning, right? And Wes, and I talk about this a lot, but like the beginning of that movement feels daunting, but then you often lose sight of the gain you got long term from the momentum. Like, what are your thoughts on this kind of security flywheel concept of if you get in, get started, and then make it better, it'll continue to grow?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like with the CIS controls, right? You got three levels, just start with the smallest level,
Yeah,
start with the smallest controls, build those up. Once you have it done, it just starts to fall into place with everything else. And going back to RMMs, we were very early adopter on RMMs,
yeah, I bet.
and yes, we had several tools thrown at us in the very beginning and no idea what to do with them. But eventually, they start building out processes and standards on what we start doing operationally, as
Sure.
far as all of our engineers using it. Yeah,
Yep. Yeah, and ultimately it saved human hours at some point, right? And we got the gains
exactly.
back to do other things. My point is,
Yep.
once you get security baked in, it becomes a lot like that. So the tactical takeaway is like start now and gain the momentum. You'll get better and better over time. Okay, this one's the hardest one, I think. When we talked about this live with Eric and Cameron, it was really about stop focusing on the controls and stop focusing on the safeguards and stop digging in deeply into the things, but rather focus on business outcomes and business protections and business success. I had a CEO tell me once, she said, I understand our problem now, Owen. She said,
Yeah.
Matt, your job and my job are completely opposed. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, your job is to tell me about risk and to tell me about not taking risk. My job as an executive in the capitalistic society we live in is to take a risk and for that be rewarded a profit. My job is literally to take risk. I put in money and hope this business idea succeeds. I guide it and grow it, and I take the risk that it won't. And I take lots of risks along the way of maybe not being prepared for this contract or not having the right staff or not having the right capabilities. And so my job is to take risk, and your job is to tell me not to take risk. And I think Brian
Yeah.
McConnell nails it. Our job is to
Yeah.
explain the risk
Explain the
and
risk.
yeah,
Yeah.
and tell
And
people
we're
which ones
also
to
risk
take.
adverse, right?
We
Yeah. We're
are.
also
Yeah.
risk adverse ourselves.
Yeah.
So we definitely can explain the risks.
It's so bad in my life, and I know we only have a few minutes left, but my dad was using a lighter, and it's the only grill lighter I have in the house to pry a stick out of his bike tire. And my challenge was like, it's not that I think he's going to break it. It's that by introducing that risk over that perfectly good screwdriver, it didn't need to happen. So, anyways, I digress. But
Yeah.
risk averse by default. Hey, Cody Grace, great to see you as well, buddy. Risk must be calculated. And really, what we have to do is give advice of business outcomes and how we can make the risk manageable and scalable for a business outcome, in Matt Lee's opinion. And that we focus on by using CIS. We allow you to give yourself the protection and defensibility of a lot smarter people than you could afford inside your organization. People that have given us these standards to follow that allow me to have a roadmap and for us to come together on what are those points of risk, right? And so my point is that when we're using CIS, don't use it for the controls, use it to be about the controls. That we're doing this because it is the right thing to do. And the way we take this risk the best is by looking at IG1. And because we're in risk alignment there, we don't need to look at IG2 and 3 yet, or whatever that answer might be based on your clients. Okay, next. The other thing is Eric likes to use this when talking to clients to say, like, I could just come in and throw a dart and pick a tool. But if I actually pick it based on the controls like we showed in that Excel sheet, then now I actually have a defensible reason we used this, chose this, and can tell a reasonability story, right? So he uses this to show that it scales with organizations. As you get bigger, we have other options and paths. But by tying it to tools like this, and even CIS has gotten this. CIS is partnering with us on the mappings. There are risks that are unfavorable, so we try to mitigate those risks in some way. Yep, we can accept risks and move forward. Sometimes we know
Yep.
about big risks and move forward. Like you've seen it. We've all seen
Yep.
it. Yeah, okay, cool. Next, because we're in essence of time, how to show value and progress to the C-suite. This, if there's nothing else you take away in this, I think this is the actual answer that I want you to think about, is the shared responsibility. What Eric can do is say, hey, you left on, of the 56 machines that you have, we patched 12 and we have an A. Well, how do you have an A? Well, because you only left 12 on as we asked you to. You fought us on this window, like you can show the A and the F. Well, now you have an F because you left most of your machines offline, right, in that regard. And so you can start grading based on score by the input of the ones they're supposed to do, the ones you're supposed to do, the ones that are a shared responsibility. You can score along those lines. And so I like using that for the way we have conversations. And, you know, what Eric likes to say, he's an executive. He said, I can see 3 colors at most. He said, you show me green, yellow, and red and tell me where I'm at on that compendium, and that's all I want to see. And so the point is that it gives you an argument of how to look at the data in a granular way to speak towards the reasonability of the efforts that have been put in place. So the takeaway here is you should grade your clients and show them their grade, and yourself, and show them your grade and be honest about it. Okay. The last piece I want to cover on this safeguard set or on this sheet was the columns that all spoke towards governance or spoke towards looking what good looks like. If you can't provide evidence of something happened, and you've probably said this to your own technicians, if it's not in the ticket notes, it didn't happen, right? And the argument is that if you're not documenting, you can't prove it, you don't have set for what your measurement expectations are, you're not going to succeed. So for example, prerequisites, this is something that'll guide towards governance. Here's what I know I need to have in order to be successful. Tools required, here's what I'm going to use. Here's the scalpel, here's the fat spreader, here's the sponge, those pieces. And then, is that specific software? Yeah, David, they were using, I think, Lifecycle Insights, and he built it into that. Maybe I'm incorrect, but he just used some kind of tool. I think it was Lifecycle Insights. Where can I get a list of CIS tools? stay tuned. Pax8 has a decent list. Cyberrise.org will be publishing a GitHub of what we've approved very soon. And we're potentially partnering with CIS as well to co-deliver that, because CIS has started their own framework mapping process, and we're working together on that potentially. Okay, so yeah, good questions got answered. CIS, Jeff, I have a spreadsheet from Pax8. Yeah, and also your Pax8 partner can help with you as well. I don't think it's proprietary either. They're glad to let you use it, so welcome. Matt Lee says you can use it. I don't know. It might get me in trouble. I don't care. It's great data, though. It's good to use, and it's pretty good poke at it. Okay, so the point is you need to know what good looks like, right? I need to say, if I have a deliverable to the client, I damn sure should be able to show that I did that deliverable. If I have exceptions, I need to manage those, right? If I have remediation ticket, I need to manage those. And so the point is that you need to document what those look like and what governance elements serve those orange pieces we talked about before. In this case, on this safeguard, it says validate for 5.1. Validate all active accounts are active on a recurring schedule, minimum quarterly or more frequently. There's your cadence, right? And so I just wanted to point out one of the controls that has a cadence in it. Eric then goes into, like, if he could start again, he tracked that there were 2,000 something hours that his team put into implementing these controls in their PSA that he actually tracked. And he said, if I could do this again, what would I do? So first was shameless plug for the bubble visualizations. That link is available as well. I'll get that to you guys. I don't know how, but we can let Owen and team solve that. But that link is in CyberEyes, can grab that. Build out a service catalog, tie your stuff, like using those Excel sheets or some method, tie the things you're doing for the safeguards to your service catalog, to what you're doing and to what you sell your clients. And if you can, at best, in my opinion, I would go more and more the things I sell through me or to me that I buy and put into their price and force them to have that are enablers. Password manager would be one of those, right? This helps you return CIS requirements into an implementation. And then also review and audit your current tool stack. If you already got something that's solving the problem, don't go spend more money. You want to be profitable. You need to be profitable. You have families you love, you have employees you care about, and you want to exit one day potentially. So you do need to care about the profit and the efficacy. And part of the reason we're doing the Framework Maps project is to make it apparent what tools do what and what way. And that's one of the reasons we came up with that common language and method to approach that. All right, resources. I'll save this for y'all. CIS Controls 8.1, CDM 2.0, CyberEyes Pax8 visuals, Virginia Tech CIS, Cybercast podcast by Andrew Morgan, does a great job of explaining a lot of these concepts. And then auditscripts.com. If you don't have a GRC, and you should, there are too many not for resale options for you as an MSP to use, in my opinion, Excel sheets long term. But if you just want to let perfect not be the enemy of good, Audit Scripts has a decent job of getting you started on some governance and compliance capabilities. RSA taught me this, and then I'll end with this. What should you take away? What's our North Star, in my opinion? Prioritizing the controls. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Get started, get a win, come back and make it better. Don't look for perfect the first time. Use the bubbles to find the relevant parts, cross them off as you accomplish them. Be intentional. If you don't push this inside your own organization and into the way you externalize through your tools and services, it won't happen. You have to make it happen. It sucks. It's drudgerous. It is not my favorite thing to do, but it is something you have to do. Translating controls. Fill out the template for each IG1. You'll gain clarity of what you need to do. Sometimes you'll use the same answer for 3 different safeguards, right? You may have to modify your packages and add-ons to do this and accomplish it. To do this at scale, integrate expectations into your KPIs of your humans. Recurring tickets need to be managed so that you can actually do what you put it where the humans work. Give your humans time to focus on safeguards. Automate whenever and wherever possible. I say that with my security grain of salt on that. So let's just say I have whole thoughts on that. That would be a whole different talk. Driving executive buy-in, be able to visually represent progress and failure. Going back to that, use some way to show you're an A, I'm an A, we're doing great together. Or I'm a B, you're an A, I have failed you a smidge. Or you're an F, I'm an A, you have failed me. Have that ability. And then focus on risk discussions. And this was nailed perfectly by the audience here of what I was getting at was this is a risk discussion, right? And shared responsibility. Gosh, I mean, I couldn't have thanked for a better and more mature audience. Y'all made this super simple. So hopefully I gave you something valuable. Oh, and I'm done. I'm out of content. They're out of time. But
Yeah,
yeah.
that was
Any
awesome.
closing thoughts?
No, I mean, this is definitely it. I mean, I think the prioritizing the controls is probably the biggest key that anyone should take away is just start nibbling this thing off one small bite at a time, one small control. If a control trips you up, move
Yeah.
to the next control
Yeah.
that you can accomplish. Because you'll find that as you accomplish the simple controls, that helps you accomplish the more complicated controls.
Yeah.
and then finally put in the things that you need in order to meet the more complicated controls in place.
Yep. And I want to say thank you to CyberFOX for time and effort to organize this and bring everybody together for this and not make it a big sales pitch and let me just be me. So thank you all so much for having us. And Eric and Cameron, just give them a big round of applause, even though they're in absentia in this particular presentation. So thank you all for having me. Appreciate everybody.
Thank you much, guys.
See y'all.
Appreciate it.